Hi, Brendan.
Hey there, Sajay. See, we have a PR for Oris. I don't know if we want to talk about that one today or not.
Oh,
That
good.
looks,
I didn't see it. I haven't seen it.
yeah, sitting out there, number 7. I've not had a chance to fully review it. Did I put that Oris one on the agenda for today? Is that all right for us to discuss?
Sure.
Does Oris have any long-lived APIs in terms of you open up the Oris API and you're talking to a registry over a long period of time, multiple repos, that sort of thing, or is it more focused on just running a single command to a single repo and then it's done the client interface exits at that point?
It's there's one copy operation which is recursive, and you know that. So
Mm.
that's the only one that has anything that's long lived. But no, there's no concept of a session API that you open up and then do a bunch of operations on it. It's not scriptable anyway, or like there's no interactive session. So it's
Yeah.
one command.
Yeah, because you've got the command line. So I'm assuming with the command line, that's going to be entirely whatever the command is you run, it executes that and it finishes. If anybody imports as a library, though, I would wonder if they would do something a little more complicated with that.
Yeah, we are. I think there's a bunch of scenarios that's coming up with Mount. I think there was one PR to open up the Mount API and things like that. So um possible, but it's still I'm not we haven't heard anything that's been built like fully interactive like
Okay. Yeah,
that.
a lot of, go
Sorry,
ahead.
go No, no, finish your thought.
I was going to say a lot of the complications that I think of when I'm working through different scenarios in my head come back to my registering project where you can have multiple copies between multiple sources and destinations all happening in like a cron schedule.
Mm,
And
yeah.
so that creates a lot of scenarios where you might have already talked to that registry server in the past for a different copy for a different repo. And now you're talking to it again in the future. And so I wonder if you just don't have those issues because if you're just focused on the command line, it's just the one operation you're running.
Right. Right.
We're definitely past the top of the hour, past the 5 after even. I figured today would be good to go over the ORSPR if folks are up for that. Is it easier if I share screen on this, folks? If I share the right screen, I should say. So I'm moving windows around. Open a couple side windows here just so I can keep track of side conversations. Alrighty.
We can see. Thanks.
Yeah. So yeah, here's their PR. And I think the biggest thing that I get out of this right off the bat is when you're doing any request, you just go straight to whatever API you're talking to. And you don't worry about doing like the V2 ping scenario or anything like that. You just go straight to the API, which is similar stuff that I've been doing. I think it's the direction that we want to go in this project in general. I'm leaving quiet spots in case people want to comment on that. Let's see. And then we got the basic and the bare. And then if you get the 401, that's when you switch over to doing your different authentication. So I think in that case, that follows really closely with everything else I've been doing on my side. And kind of the direction that we hear from folks like the Docker team saying, hey, we want to not replicate that behavior of Moby that they were doing. Have anything in here that talks about the cross repository blob mount?
Yeah, mount is missing. That's what I thought. I
Okay.
mean, we could even merge this and say, can we add mount also to it? Might be easier.
I mean, it may just be that when you make the request and say, I'm trying to go across from one to the other, it should get that challenge back and saying, hey, you need to request whatever that is. And that should be in that cross repository blob mount response from the registry. So it's possible they didn't do anything special for that. You would know better than I would.
No, I haven't debugged this one. This is all Sylvia. She's done the PR, so I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Now that's interesting. Merging it with the built-in known scopes. And so I'm assuming that you build your own scopes according to the model. And so I do something very similar to that. If I know that I'm going to need pull and push to a repo, I throw in my own scope in there in addition to everything else that the registry is doing. Are there folks with opinions on whether or not we should be doing that? I think I've been doing that just because I figure I'm going to run into a registry that doesn't give me everything I need right off the bat. Delete is new to me, though. I don't think I've seen delete anywhere.
I think it's probably more of a stance of if you start defining what the scopes are and whatnot, then you're starting to define the actual implementation and you're no longer just saying, I'm going to do what the registry trusts me to do and do what the registry says. I'm going to do what I want to do regardless, which starts opening up the doors for things going wrong of sorts. I mean, there's nothing saying you can't do that, but I think it's probably.
I think what's happening here though is a hybrid, because they're saying they're merging it. And like I was saying a second ago, I think you just joined in. I do something very similar to this where I merge whatever the registry asks me to do with what the distribution project spec, not OCI distribution, but the distribution project specified for how they want the scopes to be done. And so it's a hybrid of both.
Yes and no, but then you're also sort of coupling to, well, now the distribution can't necessarily change things as easily because different clients may interpret and parse things differently. I mean, I go back to like the Moby client, which completely rebuilds the entire thing from scratch, which is a not desirable process for many reasons. I mean, we ran into this when we were trying to say, hey, we wanted to start passing along repo plus tag, not just repo. Well, since some clients didn't properly or consistently parse the scope aspect, then that broke in some clients. Like it worked fine in Containerd, it broke in the Moby client, worked fine in some of the other tooling, but it's sort of inconsistent behavior then, since it's not well defined. And so I think in terms of scoping this project, if you say, hey, we're just going to take what the registry sends and, use that as is, you don't really have to dive into the implementation details. Once you start diving into, well, we can parse the scopes and push in our own actions. Well, now you also have to add in rules for, okay, well, what are the different repository or scope types? What are the different ways to parse and handle a repo? What are the different ways to do all these other things? And not saying that's necessarily bad, it just greatly increases the scope of what to recommend and how to handle things. I don't know.
Yeah, given all these implementations, they didn't have a spec to go behind with, right? Like they kind of like organically grew. If the auth group, like this group, feels that it needs to standardize, this would be the data point that different clients are doing this differently. So maybe we should recommend standardization.
I'll have to look. I think it might have been GCR that I had to start adding my own scopes in there because it wasn't giving me a new scope when I needed it. Part of this was also going back to the very beginning conversation of long-lived clients, where I'm talking to a registry. I tried to pull from one repo in the very beginning, and it gave me one authentication header that said you need to request this thing with the repo and doing a pull on this tag or something like that. And then I'd go to talk to that same registry. I need to push to a different repo. I, as a client, know that I'm talking to a different repository and I need a different scope. The registry doesn't always know that I was talking to it before. And so when I pass it an old token from a different repo, there's nothing on the client side to know that it should re-request an authentication, and there's nothing on the server side that knows that I didn't even try to request authentication of that repo.
I mean, the token should have a timeout. I mean, it should know that it needs a request anyway.
I mean, when I say I then go, this could be milliseconds later.
I mean, these clients also go cross-registry. So it's not just limited to a repository challenge itself.
When you change registries, though, you'll have different tokens for the different registries.
Right. The point is that there's a scope that, when you say scope, you're talking about scope with respect to a specific token for a given repository, right? I think that's what we haven't identified here. That there's no concept of cross-repository scopes as we think about it right now. or the merging is not standardized in any way?
Merging, I think this gets passed as a form field, right? Do they talk about it in here?
Yeah,
Reading through.
it does a form field.
There's depending on this, okay, scope, resulting scopes from the merge. There are two ways to pack the request to the server. One is using a form and the other one is using URL encoding. But both of them, there is a standard method for adding multiple scopes.
When you say standard method, we're talking about distribution implementation, right?
I think the form packing method, we're going back to RFCs, and I'm pretty sure same for the URL as well. I mean, it's just a field on the request to get the authentication token at that point. And so you have one or more scopes that the server would have given you. And this is saying you're adding in extra scopes that you expected the server would have wanted.
Okay, but we're comfortable kind of documenting that HTTP RFC is what we would like to use for going forward, right? For authentication on authorization.
I would. I think the question we've been going back and forth here about is, should the client add in new entries to that list if it thinks the server might not have given it everything? And we don't have to solve that here. You know, we're documenting that ORS does this. So I'll document the reg client. It does pretty much this as well. So it's more just a question going forward when we start to standardize this. Is that something we want to do, or do we want to leave it strictly to the server at that point? And even if we leave it strictly to the server, clients may still do this stuff.
I mean, I think it makes sense to, yes, if you're interacting with multiple repositories and you get back two challenges from the registry, each with different scopes. I mean, yeah, it's per spec kind of allowed to merge in multiple of those scopes. I think one of the things I want to get away from is sort of manually building out your own based off of what you think you need versus what the registry is telling you need, just from the perspective of that sort of ties the registry implementation to being unable to iterate and improve, and kind of trusting that clients will kind of adhere to that properly. Because I know that's something we ran into and I would love to get away from, but
the fact that we're merging this, shouldn't that mean that we're able to do that? The registry can iterate and do their stuff, and we're just adding in extra scopes. We're not taking away what the registry gave us.
I guess it depends on what you mean by merging in. Like if I'm trying to do a Docker poll or I don't know, something poll of two different repos, each request to the registry is going to give me a different challenge. One, hey, you need this scope on this repo, and the other one, hey, you need this scope on this other repo. Merging those two complete challenges into one request to the auth server, I think, is valid. But for the client to say, I want to interact with this repository and I think I'm going to need this scope, so let me just rebuild that whole thing myself and just hit that, pass that to the auth server without interacting with the registry, where we start getting into problems.
So to give this another bit of context, anytime I do a blob push, I first do a blob head to check to see if the blob is already there. And the registry will always tell me, you need to run this repository repo pull for the authentication. And the very next request I'm going to send is doing an upload. And so the registry may come back and say, well, you're not authorized to do that. You need to have the push authorization, and that wasn't on your request. And so should the registry fail on that and say you're unauthorized? Should the registry give back another header that says your token isn't good enough, give me a token that has this new scope in there? Or should the client say, you know what, I should probably try to update this to have the push in there because I know I'm getting ready to do a push, even though the registry doesn't know that?
I mean, it's a good question, and it's really who you're optimizing for. Like I understand the use case, and when you are doing something as a client and you kind of have forward knowledge on what you're doing, then like yes, you can be more intelligent about that. But that also means that you have to be completely up to date with how that registry is handling the authorization, and you have to be much more detailed in the request instead of just blindly saying I'm going to pass along what they have. I mean, I agree you can do more optimization that way. If you know ahead of time you're going to be working with 3 repositories and you're going to be doing push and pull to all of them, you can do that all ahead of time, and you can reduce your round trip to the server. The server won't care one way or the other, but you as a client could optimize it. I'm just saying from like a spec standpoint, that increases the scope of what we're going to cover, because now instead of the spec just saying hit the auth server and do what it tells you, or hit the registry and do what it tells you, and we don't really care what that intermediate format looks like, we don't really care what those scopes look like, we don't care about any of that, just do what it tells you. Now the auth spec is now going to have to define what these types are, what these valid types are, what these different actions and valid actions are going to be, what the repo format is going to look like. There's a lot. It just increases what we have to define in here. Ultimately, yes, that means you can build more efficient clients. That's not a bad thing. Yeah.
Even if I'm not getting rid of the round trip, because what I found was that I was doing the request, I would do the pull request or the head request, and it would have the pull authorization for that repo. The second I turned around and tried to turn that into a push request, it would just hard fail on some registries. It wouldn't give me back the 401 that said you need to go do this authentication, another round trip to go do another authentication. It would flat out hard fail on certain registries.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting one to document and figure out how to handle it. And I think that also goes into there's not really a way within the current auth spec to kind of handle the difference between you never asked for this and you asked for this and were denied it. Those are two separate things that we don't have a way to tell the difference between. And I think that would be a very interesting thing to dive into.
Yeah, I guess I just kind of wonder if the scope is, it seems like it's kind of designed to be kind of an opaque value, or at least parts of it should be an opaque value. But given the fact that it is human readable, I think humans are going to, when they write clients, they're probably going to do stuff with it, which seems to kind of imply that we might want to kind of spec out the behavior of scopes. But,
it should be opaque. The original Docker spec made it client specified.
Mm-hmm.
And we're undoing some of that history at this point if we go the direction I think we're going.
Yeah, it just seems like, just given human nature, it seems like as long if you can actually read it, you're going to have developers try to outsmart it. So,
I mean, I'm looking at the delete request here, and I'm thinking I never even knew that was an option.
Yeah.
I want to add another feature to my code now. So I'm kind of skim reading as we're chatting. I know that there was for bear authentication, there were a few methods of doing that request. And it was whether it was all set in the URL or whether it was a form request. I'm not sure if that's what the fetch a distribution token. Okay, that's the base64 user password.
Yeah, that's the query string one.
I believe so, yeah. So those all being query parameters, you just define the parameter multiple times for something like the scope. the OAuth version here is the form value. So yeah, we have all read the same Docker code at this point, or same distribution code. That's the exact same thing that I do. Set a client ID, you pass the scope field in there. And I'd have to look to see if you just pass the entry multiple times, add the form field multiple times, if there's anything else in that array syntax. But I believe it's all just following RFCs at that point. There is in here a ping of the V2 API just for the login process. So when you're setting that and storing it into your local credential store, before it stores it, it does a quick ping of the V2 API and make sure that that user is actually coming back with a 200. Any concerns on that one? I think that's fairly normal. I'm pretty sure Docker did that before. I don't know if they're doing that going forward with the Containerd integration.
Yeah, I mean, that's fairly standard. You could really do that against literally any registry endpoint, because I think for the spec or something, any endpoint would return the same information. That just essentially generates an empty pull request.
Right. Anything else on this one we want to chat about? I know I need to spend some time sitting down and looking over it, but I feel like it does a lot of the same stuff that I'm doing on my side, at least. Otherwise, anything else we'd like to chat about today? If not, we can always end early. I will commit myself to at least getting the Reg client implementation submitted next week. And I also saw there was a request for a fix on one of my PRs over here as well. So I will get that patched up in a little bit. My Moby PR that I had from a while back. So everybody just want back 30 minutes for your day?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. Going once, going twice. Have a good rest of your day and look forward to seeing folks either later this week, next week. Take care.
Thank you.